our really big goal in the future, and hopefully something we can tackle in 2021. Obviously blockchain and IoT is very complex, but when these two devices are allowed to talk to each other, pay each other, and even make decisions based on each other, then we're going to start to see some really, really cool stuff, right?
Layer 1 is a podcast and community dedicated to helping you master all things crypto. We'll be bringing you the best interviews with project executives, technical analysis for trading of the most popular cryptocurrencies, and insight into what's actually happening behind the scenes.
As you join us each episode, you're going to hear about tokens, fundraisers, investments, and even crypto conspiracies. But please remember that nothing we say should be considered financial or legal advice.
Come join us on this journey, and welcome to Layer 1.
All right, good morning, good evening, good night. It is another episode of Layer 1. We're bringing you the best, and this episode is going to be one. We have Larry Peng, Head of Business Development for IoTeX. We're going to have a great conversation on the Internet of Trusted Things and everything they're doing on the IoTeX protocol. Larry, I want to get kind of your introduction here, but I also want to know, is that a one-of-one Van Gogh behind you?
Oh yeah, it's a one-of-one directly from the street. We actually picked this up randomly. There's so many things that people leave on the street in San Francisco, and we like to populate our house with it sometimes. So I'm a fan of Van Gogh. I like the fact that he's not fully there, not fully sane, but still, I think the best leaders are exactly like that. And I got to go to the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, so it's a little relic of the past. But yeah, it's my backdrop for podcast.
You have a better backdrop than I, sir. So I definitely want to know how you're doing today and this week and this month as we kind of see Bitcoin run up to 20K here. How are you doing in the realm of crypto before we get into this podcast, man?
I mean, just looking at the industry, you can feel the energy within the industry. But, I was just back home for Thanksgiving and talking to my parents. And I remember the last time we were talking, 2017, they were saying all these WeChat groups, right? My parents are Chinese, so they're saying all these WeChat groups are talking about Bitcoin, Doge, or like all these coins. So I went back and I asked them, what's WeChat saying about Bitcoin now? And it's crickets. They're all talking about Tesla. So maybe that's an indication about retail interest in Bitcoin. But, for those of us in the industry, eyes on the prize, and, just really excited to see, what's going on right now. Of course, Bitcoin leads the way, but I think what we're doing is going to be really impactful for 2021 and beyond. So glad to chat about all that stuff throughout the podcast.
I love what you guys are doing with real world adoption, man. And we'll definitely get to all the devices that you guys are working with on IoTeX. But I kind of want to get your background into crypto. I know we were talking about a little bit before the podcast about the 2017 times, but kind of give me a background of your time at MIT, a little bit of that consulting that you got into, and then how you found yourself with us today.
Absolutely.
In crypto.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Los Angeles. Was really groomed to be like an Ivy League student type of thing, playing tennis, 2 hours a day, not for the purpose of enjoying tennis, but, trying to get into college and things like that. So lived a very rigid childhood in LA, but just being in LA, so many fun opportunities. So, but then I got a little culture shock. I went to MIT on the East Coast in Boston, studied business and finance there, and then moved to New York right after to jump into consulting. They usually say, when you don't know what you want to do out of school, you go into consulting. So that's exactly what I did, right? Stayed there for about 3 years and then switched offices over to San Francisco. But that East Coast culture, it's really interesting because I grew up thinking and understanding the way like Los Angeles people do. Then I was thrown into the pool of East Coast, and they definitely think a lot different. Not saying anyone is right or wrong. And then finally moving here to SF, to Silicon Valley, you see a lot of different perspectives and just people think about things in a different way. So I've really valued that about I've always had a big passion to learn how to learn. So learning how to learn from different people and the way they think, I think is the best part of kind of this hoppy journey that I'm on. But yeah, we'll see where the future takes us.
Yeah, I know this is an interview about yourself, but I can't help but say I had the same journey being a military kid. I was born in San Diego, moved to Hawaii, then, went to Virginia. So what's the biggest difference if you could kind of tack down one difference? I don't mean to put anybody in the spot. What's the biggest difference from the West Coast and the East Coast, man?
I mean, from a non-professional standpoint, right? Like one thing I realized is LA and New York are very good for spontaneity, right? If you want to get together, it's like, hey, meet me at this bar, or hey, meet me at this place, right? But San Francisco, I'm struggling a little bit because I'm a very spontaneous, like ADD type of person. But there's a lot of planning involved here. It's like, hey, bring this to the potluck. We'll meet here, do the house party type of thing. Not that we're doing too much partying in COVID time, but
Yeah.
it's just one like interesting thing about people always say like SF and LA are always pretty chill states or cities, but there's definitely differences, and I think it stems down from the professional kind of the way the people carry themselves, but just emanates all throughout. So I think it's interesting to think about.
Awesome answer, man. I'm throwing you a lot of hardballs early in this call here, but the
No, I
last thing,
love it. I love it.
yeah, man. So you found yourself in crypto. How? I know you said you were doing consulting for a little while. I'm sure that
Hmm.
kind of found your way into tech, maybe. But how did you get into crypto here?
Yeah, so I actually did a lot of different projects, right? Consulting works in a way where you have 3-month projects around, sometimes could be 6 months, sometimes could be a year, but every project has a different set of partners that are leading the project and a different team. So in that capacity, it was very exciting for me because you get to work on something brand new, drink from the fire hose every 3 months, learn something completely brand new, and learn from leaders that, again, think differently, right? All these partners are different. But one project in particular, I did a project for the World Economic Forum on kind of this trend of financial inclusion in the payment space. And we're looking at different technologies like M-Pesa, which is a peer-to-peer mobile payments technology from Kenya that really leapfrogged the entire banking system. And we talked about, the perils of Western Union and how much fees they charge on borderless transactions. And that led us to think about Bitcoin, right? So we included Bitcoin in that report to the World Economic Forum about something to watch, right? This was 2015 around. And I didn't think too much after that, right? I think I understood the concept. I was like, oh, wow, Ethereum is doing their ICO. But it was only until I did another project for this really big financial market utility, meaning like a public good, right? They service the financial industry to clear most of the derivatives in the US. I can't name the name, but people probably know what I'm talking about. And we were doing a digital transformation project for them. And if you look at the guts of their technology, they were running mainframe and they were storing data on tape. These are all things I didn't even understand were possible, right? So our job was to move them to the cloud. And they only did it until we told them, hey, FINRA is doing this. The financial regulators are doing this. So it's comfortable for you guys to do it. That was about 5 years ago, right? And now I think we're at a similar cusp, right? When you tell people about blockchain, they're like, okay, like why is it safe for me to do that? They're looking for the regulator or the answer about who's using this technology so that they can start to adopt their own systems. And I think we're at the cusp, right? It's not necessarily a PayPal. It's going to be like someone like the SEC using blockchain. It's going to be the big moment for all these companies to really dive in. But jumping back to your question, we also brought in some like vendors to pitch us blockchain-based solutions. At that time, NASDAQ and this company called Cinnober that they introduced, they were thinking about issuing a blockchain-based clearing system. And we did all the requirements definition. And I was like, no one liked this solution except me. I was like, this is awesome. Like, what's the problem with it? There's like, blockchain's not a thing, right? So that made me go down the rabbit hole a little bit. I hate when people say you can't do things. So I tried to think about how this blockchain model could work in something like a very massive centralized, to replace these centralized intermediaries, right? That kind of led me down the rabbit hole. One of my really good friends invested in IoTeX really early on. And I told him about what I'm interested in. And he says, you guys should talk to these guys. And, I think I got a really similar feeling from like learning about IoTeX as I did when I learned about Bitcoin. It was more about these guys are thinking about something that's very important, but in a totally different way. And, love to dive more into how exactly IoTeX thinks about that. But that's kind of the journey, man. I think everyone has their own journey in crypto to, think about the world and question why things need to work the way they do, which is why we're all in this industry. So
That's honestly my favorite part of the conversation is the first 5 minutes where I get to hear everybody's background. But I definitely want to hear more about IoTeX too. You were talking
Hmm.
about building out this whole ecosystem and what you guys are doing with the different devices and how you're kind of connecting all of them with an underpinning of privacy and data and all of these different things. So let's get into IoTeX. I know I do want to give a shout out to Metnix real quick. He was our friend over on the IOST project and also kind of introduced us to you. So shout out to Metnix at this part of the episode. But let's get into IoTeX. What does the Internet of Trusted Things mean, and what are you guys doing there?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, shout out Metanix for setting this up. But the Internet of Trusted Things is kind of IoTex's vision statement, right? The Internet of Things, just to start there, is kind of this phenomena of smart devices that are collecting information about us, whether it's in our daily lives, our businesses, and then using that information to make our lives better, right? This is the thing that we've been told by all these companies that give us these products, right? But the real question here is, there's going to be about 50 billion smart devices in the world in the next 5 years, right? And those 50 billion devices are going to generate 80 zettabytes of data. 1 zettabyte is 1 trillion gigabytes, so 80 trillion gigabytes of data, right? We all talk about, where is our social media data going? Where is this going? But if you think about the grand scale of what the Internet of Things will be, why do we not own any of that information? And more importantly, how can we build trust in the information that other people send us from their smart devices, right? So by inserting trust into the Internet of Things, it quite literally becomes the Internet of Trusted Things. And that's the vision of what we're trying to enable with blockchain, secure hardware, and this technology called confidential computing, which are all in themselves kind of tamper-proof technologies that we string together, right? So along this journey, the reason why we're so passionate about this is because I think in the next 10 years, we're going to see a lot of our world start to become even more digitized, right? We're going to be using more smart devices every day. It's not just going to be our phones or laptops, but sensors are going to be everywhere. NFC tags to prove provenance. Think about all the technology you use in your car, in your farm, in your business, in your smart city, even to track your runs and things like this. So it's only going to grow from here, right? But all we see are people pitching us new features, right? Amazon just announced a flying home camera. Tell me why I need that versus a device that guarantees my security and privacy. So we think this is the prerequisite to make private devices smart instead of smart devices private, using things like regulation, right? We have to build privacy and security into the foundational level, and then we can start to add new features, right? And no offense to like the smart device manufacturers of the past 20 years, right? They've made our lives increasingly better, but now we have technologies where we can re-architect our world in a way that just makes more sense, right? It's like, why do we give up this information that are basically derivatives of our physical activities and then offer them to people completely naked so they can do whatever they want on their centralized servers, right? Like when you put it that way, no one wants that, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to get the uninitiated person or someone who doesn't understand the back end processes like you would, you're essentially talking about, and I'm going to use the example of Ucam and Ring and all of these different cameras that we kind of put around our house. You're essentially saying that these are data points that go into a centralized storage or some type of centralized cloud. Is that how it works
Hmm.
today? And how are you guys changing that?
Yeah, just a little history on like, we always hear like Web 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, right? A lot of people think these are just buzzwords. They kind of are, but they do have meaning, right? So Web 1.0 was kind of all these initial protocols, HTTPS, TCP/IP, domain name systems that the original internet, the World Wide Web, was really built upon. The original internet was built to be open, right? Anyone can leverage these protocols to build websites and things on top of these open protocols. But what you started to see with Web 2.0, starting with a lot of the centralized tech giants, is they built proprietary and vertically integrated tech stacks on top of Web 1.0 and called it Web 2.0, right? In the beginning, it was kind of nascent, right? You have Google giving us search for the first time, giving us email for the first time. You have Apple giving us a phone for the first time, and Amazon, all of these great bells and whistles where when you present them to people, they're like, gimme, 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 right? Even I was like that, right? It's like, of course I'm going to use this new feature. Why do I want to use CDs when I can have a digital iPod? And, so the pace of technology was so rapid. And it was all based on these vertically integrated Web 2.0 stacks, right? But flash forward 10 years now, and those Web 2.0 stacks have gone from big to behemoths, right? There was a big thing about, in 2008, banks were too big to fail. Now we have tech companies that are too big to fail. And not only are they too big to fail, but they control everything in their ecosystems, right? We see all these headlines about Apple and Fortnite competing for ad revenue because the terms are not appropriate. We have, all these centralized hacks and, Google changing the rules of their search engine so that it really damages a lot of news websites because they don't, have the heads up, right? So we are very much living in the world of these centralized tech giants today. And we got to question why, right? Why do we want to continue to do this? Because the problem is only going to get worse, right? And I think blockchain is this, or decentralized technologies is this picture of Web 3.0, where we're not necessarily trying to create new functionalities today. We're trying to replicate the functionality of Web 2.0, but in a private, decentralized, and verifiable way, right? And I think that's the prerequisite, as I mentioned before, right? We have to get this security and privacy thing right first before we really dive into the bells and whistles, at least in the IoT industry. So
Yeah, and I always have to remind myself that especially in crypto, a lot of the outside world doesn't think like you or me. So I wonder what you think about this concept of people not caring about their privacy or people not caring about their data. Is it going to take specific events like Facebook or more Snowdens or things like this to get people to actually care? Or do you think it's going to be we're kind of grinding up towards that moment where people just start to really care?
That's a good question. I think it depends on what part of the world you're in. We talk to a lot of people from around the world, right? One thing I've noticed with America, I love this country. I was born here, but a lot of people in America think for themselves, right? COVID is a very telling example of what I mean by that, right? It's like all you got to do is put on a mask and you can help others, but some people choose not to do that, right? So privacy, I also consider to be that way, right? Everyone wants collective privacy, but no one's willing to make the individual actions to take the charge, right? It has to be like a herd mentality in order for privacy to really be the de facto standard, right? But I think, there are fringe people, like everyone in our community values privacy, values security, and kind of shares our vision here, right? But at the same time, getting people to care about privacy means you have to give them exactly the same thing, but with privacy, right? People are not going to be sacrificing their convenience. It's kind of like a down round personally, right? It's like you don't want to take a step back as far as the convenience you live in your life. It's just human psychology type of thing, right? There's a popular saying actually in Silicon Valley that for an alternative to replace the incumbent has to be 10 times better, eight, 9, or 10 times better, right? But that's subjective, that this alternative is better than the original. We're already seeing some people say that because the devices that IoTeX is putting out are private, it's already 100 times better. I don't really care about the bells and whistles. I'm going to use the private solution. But if we're talking about converting the masses to use brand new products, you have to first educate them about why it's better and how it differs, if any, from the existing solutions they use today. And honestly, if you don't have a good justification for why it makes their lives better, don't expect people to adopt it, right? Or at least go to the people where, the audiences that will appreciate what you're saying. And I think this is where crypto is really starting to gain steam, right? All these narratives about the fact that, trust and the truth today is subjective is going to be replaced by the fact that trust must be objective in the future. And I think that's a common denominator across everything in the industry, and what IoTeX is really trying to enable for the IoT niche or category within the crypto industry.
Yeah, I want to talk about the specific products because, as somebody from old times when people were just kind of creating networks and kind of just out of vaporware essentially, and not really producing any devices, you guys have these devices. So we kind of spoke on privacy and data as it relates to a camera. the reason we did that was because Ucam is probably one of your flagship devices here on IoTeX.
Yeah, I mean, Ucam is one of our first flagship products, right? We developed it in partnership with a security camera manufacturer called Tenvis. It looks like this, and it is currently being sold on Amazon. Sold about 1,500 already. Even though that's not like mass adoption, it's adoption by the masses just in a couple months. We're really excited about that. But we get this question a lot, right? Like, how is this camera 9 or 10 times better than your normal camera? And the answer is, it does everything that your normal security camera does, but it's based on the foundation of every video is owned exclusively by you, right? The mantra of your keys, your funds that Bitcoin's popularized. We use the model, your keys, your data, right? And before we dive into like all the tech, one thing that we're really fascinated by is when we talk to normal mass market people and we explain to them the concept of a private key, it's not like they're scared of private keys. They love private keys, right? It's only when you introduce private keys that are the keys to your magical internet money, then people get really freaked out, right? But if they say, hey, this is a key to your private data, they're like, give me private keys for everything. You know what I mean? So of course they've never probably managed the backup and that process, but it's all about education, right? So compared to a normal security camera, just to give people an understanding of how they work, right? If you buy a Ring camera today, one thing that everyone should know is that your videos are in decrypted form on Amazon's server. That's without a doubt, right? And that has a lot of damage. And I think it's really the source of all bad things that happen to our information today is the fact that people have access to our data when it's decrypted. And what technology is allowing us to understand now is we can achieve the same outcomes without that happening. And that's exactly what Ucam does, right? Ucam is not just a blockchain product. We use other technologies like end-to-end encryption and edge computing to really make this an absolutely private home security camera. So we use blockchain as the identity. So people will be logging in with an IoTeX identity with their private key. And basically we take that private key and we use it to end-to-end encrypt all your videos. All the computation is done on the camera itself or the mobile phone that it's synced with. So your data is never hosted on a centralized server. It's all done on the edge, which is another kind of trend in technology that's really booming. And finally, when it's communicating between the camera and your phone, all the information is, again, end-to-end encrypted with your private key. End-to-end encryption, there's a lot of discussion about encryption these days, right? There's multiple types of encryption. One of them is end-to-end, which is the one you should be seeking out. The other is called client to server, which means from your phone to the server, meaning centralized server, it's going to be encrypted. But on the centralized server, it's decrypted. And when it leaves the centralized server, it's then end-to-end encrypted again. So that will protect you from in-transit hacks. If someone hacks your communication, then all they get is encrypted files. But if they go straight to the source where all the information is, all that's decrypted. And we've seen all the horror stories associated with that, right? So yeah, Ucam, it won the CES Innovation Award in 2020 and just the first of many products I think that will share this architecture and being powered by IoTeX.
Yeah, I've got the actual Amazon page pulled up on my screen. Beautiful graphics you guys kind of have here. Blockchain is not mentioned that much, which is what I kind of like, and I kind of want to go into this. And what is the process of onboarding these guys? Did they reach out to you and say, "Hey, we really want to build on IoTeX," or is this an internal production? Or how does this process work so that other future products can come on board?
Yeah, so we worked with a company called Tenvis, Tenvis, and they've been a security camera manufacturer since 2005. Sold millions of cameras to government, enterprise, to consumers. And their latest camera was like $30, the $30 camera that sold on Amazon for the past 3 years. They sold a couple million of these things, right? So outside looking in, very, very successful business. But what people don't see is that the margins to sell on Amazon are so razor thin because Amazon takes a big cut, right? They do all the distribution, the advertising and things like that. So even if you go to Amazon, you search security camera, you filter for 4 stars, you filter for prime, you're going to get like 10,000 plus results, right? So this entire, let me know exactly how many results you get from that. But thinking about that, right? The market is so saturated that, me adding, saying I have, 9 infrared LEDs instead of your 8 infrared LEDs, who cares, right? So they actually came to us and said, hey, we want to market privacy and security as a new feature, right? And that's something that's really interesting. The reason why you don't see blockchain too much on this Amazon listing is because Amazon is all about SEO, right? And not people are not looking for blockchain products. So we have to brand this as almost like a dog camera, but it's a private dog camera, like an indoor camera, right? So it's a mix of Amazon sales tactics as well as getting the message across, right? All we need people to know is that you can use this for everything that you would use a normal Nest or a Ring or Wisecam for, except it comes with absolutely full privacy and it's verifiable, right? All the technology we built into Ucam is available in a white paper, and just really bringing this open source hardware, open source software vibe to the market.
It really is the Trojan horse. And I like the way you put it when you were talking about that Silicon Valley quote of it needs to look, feel, everything. It needs to be better than the incumbent. So I definitely appreciate your thoughts on that. You kind of laid out your mindset, which was my next question on how you market this to individuals outside the cryptocurrency industry. 10,000 results on security camera here. So definitely a good point you made as well. So you guys have this big ecosystem. I want to get into these specific products. So you have Pebble, you have MemoDex as well. How does all of this work together, right? How does the ecosystem kind of work together? How does Ucam work with the IoTeX token, or how are they synergistic? I always am interested when the products are created and you have specifically, like, for example, with Pebble, where you have this data tracking device, how that comes back to the retail end holder of IoTeX token. I always am fascinated with that relationship. So yeah, kind of tell us how that all kind of works together.
Yeah, I think, one thing I'll touch upon later is like the tokenomics side of things, where we really try to bring like progress in the number of devices that we power with the IoTeX network and return value to shareholders based on that. But just to give you an idea of like where devices like Ucam and devices like this one you mentioned is called Pebble are trending, right? So today, this camera itself, it needs to communicate with a phone that has what's called a secure element, right? Secure elements are used in your Ledger device to hold your private key. On your phone, it manages your Face ID and your fingerprints, and it's basically a Fort Knox within your phone that's kind of isolated from the rest of your chips and things like that. So what a lot of people are using these secure elements for is to store cryptographic keys so that devices can sign transactions, right? Today, the UCAM kind of communicates with the phone to make that process possible. But what we've done is we put a secure element into this device. Is called a Pebble, right? It's basically an asset tracker. It does things like GPS, temperature, humidity, air quality, air pressure, motion, vibration, and light, right? A lot of different metrics that really give a full 360 view of an asset's environment. But what's really different about this device is you can almost think about it as an unbiased third party, right? This secure element holds, will eventually hold a blockchain wallet that will allow people to sign and make devices like a blockchain user, right? We always talk about like human-machine communication or machine-to-machine communication. That's really going to be enabled by all of these devices having an identity, and that identity being registered or understood as kind of like a blockchain identity, right? So we're really excited to push out more devices that have secure elements built into them, and that's really going to unleash a different type of trust, right? This device, I would classify it as tamper-proof hardware. The fact that the secure element is doing the signing, the verification, the authentication is almost impossible to spoof, right? The same level of security, I would say, as your iPhone that protects your face IDs, right? That's why people trust these face IDs and fingerprints. But where the industry is kind of headed, I think, is the ability for blockchain identities and decentralized identities to also interoperate with each other, right? So our really big goal in the future, and hopefully something we can tackle in 2021, obviously blockchain and IoT is very complex, but when these two devices are allowed to talk to each other, pay each other, and even make decisions based on each other, then we're going to start to see some really, really cool stuff, right? But this is not just one technology that's enabling all of this. It's a combination of blockchain, decentralized identity, secure hardware, and the last pillar is called confidential computing, which is kind of extrapolating the secure element concept, but blowing it up into like a server-sized computing capacity.
It's a lot to take
It's a
in.
handful,
It
yeah.
is a handful. It is a handful, and honestly, it sounds like just building out a neural network, right? It's just like everything that connects to each other is actually making the whole network stronger, and you need to continuously make it better, and therefore it becomes like vital, and it's all kind of interworking together. It is very complex. So, as far as Pebble is concerned, I would love an example of how it looks. So you would essentially have that microchip and that product in a supply chain system where you have like a truck that has that within it, and then it talks to different things as it's going through the supply chain process.
Right. I love to, when we think about use cases, right, for blockchain and IoT, I love to work backwards. So let's go through an example, right? What do you need to do to trust that, you know, if you're a truck operator or if you're working with a truck operator and you're shipping some COVID vaccines in the back, right? Has to be held under 0 degrees Celsius, and you have to make sure no one's opened them. And, you know, a lot of these insights need to be generated for you to work with people that you don't trust, right? We always say blockchain is kind of the neutralizing factor that will allow people that don't trust each other to trust each other. But the fact is, when you're talking about data from the physical world, you have to make sure that what you're working with is verifiable, or else how can you be on the same playing field with everyone, right? So let me give you an example, going back to that truck thing, right? So if we're trying to ship something that's perishable, and maybe we have a consortium of parties that are engaged in this supply chain step, right? What do, like, these guys will never trust each other, right? So the way it works today is they will all hire one centralized authority to be the source of truth, right? This third party, you know, maybe they have some type of relationship with one of these other corporates. You never know, right? There's always error prone. There's always corruption. There's always manipulation going on. So the fact is centralized intermediaries are biased and can't be trusted, right? So how do we replace the activities of a centralized intermediary with something that's unbiased and verifiable? One way is to use tamper-proof Internet of Things devices, right? So the fact that no one can manipulate this device means it's pretty much an unbiased third party, right? This consortium can hire a Pebble tracker or an army of Pebble trackers, place them in all their vehicles, and it will basically stream real-time GPS, temperature, humidity, and all these data points, you know, will tell you stories or tell you facts, insights about what's going on in the back of that vehicle, right? Where it is, you know, how it's being treated. If it's vibrating too much, you know, devices, you know, we can capture all this information in a trusted way today, but maybe that's not enough for everyone to trust the results, right? So if people don't trust only the Pebble tracker's data, then we add a verifiable camera into the back of that truck too. And then, you know, this is the real interesting part. It's like, what is the threshold for verifiability that will allow people that don't trust each other to then trust each other? Like, we have to work backwards, right? Like, tell me what you need. Okay, you're not trusting this thing. Okay, let's add this thing. If you're not trusting only one of these things, all right, let's point one at every, there's no blind spots in the entire thing, right? So rather than doing this reactively, like if someone is at fault for messing up a delivery, or, you know, the COVID vaccines get to the final destination and, you know, there's no understanding of who messed this up, then a huge long legal battle starts where they have to go backtrack all the information, issue subpoenas, you know, interview people. But the future is going to be proactive and objective. People are going to cover their asses by putting these devices, right? Like, unless you are the one that's trying to scam your partners, you are going to be very receptive to be, okay, let's make this foolproof, so we don't have to go through all the legal battles that, you know, we know can be billions and billions of dollars per year for these supply chain companies, right? So this is just one type of use case in one industry where I think trusted IoT devices will give us a lot of benefit, but also in the consumer space, right? Like I was thinking, you know, a great idea for the consumer space is if you have a vehicle today, right? I just got hit by a scooter. It was like one of those rent-a-scooters that they have in San Francisco.
Your
And
car or you got hit by a scooter?
no, my car got hit by
Okay,
a
all
scooter,
right.
right? I almost rather I got hit by the scooter because it did a lot of damage to my car and I paid for it. I paid my deductible. This is about 2 years ago. I haven't seen that money back, right? I don't expect to. It's a sunk cost at this point, right? But the reason why is because there was no video I had. I was in kind of like a random rural area. There was no video that captured the incident, and the guy said something different than what exactly happened, right? So in this case, I am naked. I don't have any information that can verifiably prove I'm not at fault, right? But if I had a dash cam pointing to the outside, maybe even in the future, I'll have a dash cam pointing inside to prove that my eyes are on the road. And if I can own the data from my car to say, hey, there was an impact at this time, and then cross-reference all this information, then what type of claims are there anymore, right? I'm giving you the verifiable information that I can prove came from a tamper-proof device. And when we talk about DeFi, right? When we talk about DeFi and open finance, people don't understand that in the future, devices will generate a lot of the data that we put into DeFi. Just like a crypto price oracle, if it's manipulated and leading to rug pulls, if you have non-verifiable IoT data that you want to push into a decentralized insurance smart contract, then that's going to be a huge rug pull, right? That's going to be the vulnerability point. Even scarier, if we envision a future where, you know, blockchain registered autonomous taxis are a thing, right? Then a rug pull doesn't mean you lose your funds. A rug pull means you lose your life, right? The physical world has no safety nets. And if we're trying, yeah.
When you're talking about that, I thought inputting unverifiable data into something that's already set up, wouldn't that cancel it out immediately? I'm trying to follow you down the rabbit hole. I love this conversation.
What I was saying is, like, you know, if you have a smart contract that takes instructions, right? Smart contracts are open source. But if I put an unverified data point, meaning I can't prove to other people that this is true, right? Then you're basically starting at the root point of not trusted. Then all the downstream things can't be trusted either, right? It's kind of like saying, hey, I built this house on a foundation and I don't have any proof that it's actually cement, right? It might be 5% sand and 95% cement. And if you think about that, the foundation is weak or unverifiably strong. You know, it's like today it's interesting, right? Trust and truth is very subjective, right? We trust people and companies that have a good reputation,
Based on
have good
reputation.
status.
Yep.
Yeah, or like media headlines or what other people think of these companies, right? But why does that? I think that trust model is a thing of the past, right? In the future, in the very near future, consumers are going to be like enterprises, where enterprises will demand the facts before they do business with you, right? Because they have a vested business interest to make sure what you're telling them, what you're selling them is valid, or else downstream, they're going to get screwed, right? Someone gets screwed down the line. Consumers, putting like technology in the hands of consumers where they can at least verify the highlights, I think is going to be the next big thing. And it starts with the data that comes from our devices, I think, and will emanate to many, many more things.
Man, this is an amazing conversation. We got into game theory, we got into trustlessness, we got into reputation. That was one thing I was going to say, is that within all of that, the idea of reputation or lack of reputation is why we need all of those things.
Right.
That I definitely like that you guys are approaching the privacy sector too, or the privacy like feature here, because that future that you just mentioned can get pretty dystopian really quick when everything is interconnected and you don't have privacy within those systems. That's where it gets really tricky from like who controls all of these different things, even though
It's
I
definitely
guess,
like,
go ahead.
yeah, it's definitely like flipping the model a little bit, right? Like, I wouldn't say we're a privacy project, but we are an own your data project, right? Whether you're an everyday person or an everyday business or an enterprise, right? Privacy starts with data ownership, right? The best we can do right now is co-ownership of our information with someone like a Fitbit or like a Google, right? Like if we wanted to, like, we're never going to say, hey, Google, you cannot own my information. But at least we can co-own it with them, right? In the future, if we think about devices like Ucam, right, where users exclusively own their data, that means they have a few options about what they want to do with it, right? They can keep it 100% private, which is how a lot of people will use footage from their living room, right? There's no need to share that with anyone unless there's a break-in, right? And if there is a break-in, then you have the full authority to remove your privacy and share it with somebody, right? The other thing that you can do with data that you own is you can analyze it now in a confidential manner, right? There's a lot of different, I mentioned that confidential computing concept. IoTeX recently joined the confidential computing consortium with a lot of major companies that are looking into this. It's about how do you compute over encrypted data? So you get the insights, but you don't expose the raw data. And this is already a thing. This is
Like
going to
zero
be,
knowledge.
it's kind of like zero knowledge, exactly, but more hardware based versus software based, right? It goes back to this thing. It's kind of like this secure element in the Pebble tracker.
Mm.
Blow this up into an entire server size thing and run your computations on it, right? There's a confidential computing adds the third pillar to security and privacy. It's kind of like data at rest, data in transit, and confidential computing handles data in runtime. So you can keep the entire thing kind of like in a chain of privacy, a chain of trust, right? And the last thing you can do with your data that you own is the thing that people are most excited about is buying, selling, and trading your information, or rather trading insights that are generated from the information that you own, right? But people have to be a little conscious that, you know, we see the profits from Google and Amazon and all these companies that are ripping off our data, right? But the reason why they're allowed to do that is because they've built 20 years of technology to make sense of our information and capture these massive network effects, right? So it's going to be a while until, you know, we can disintermediate Google and give the full value of what Google is earning as dividends to the data owners. But, you know, simply owning your data today is kind of like building a credit history, right? The more data you have, the more richness and the longevity it has. Same thing as like any index out there, right? If you have a 6-month index of weather data, it's not going to be
It's better.
interesting.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's going to be worse than like a 30-year index that other people are used to, right? So shooting a lot of different ideas off, but you know,
Listen, Larry, this has been an amazing conversation, man. I always rewatch the episodes, obviously, but never, not never, but rarely do I rewatch them just to download all the data again afterwards. This is definitely going to be one of them. You're hitting on all of the right spots, man. So yeah, this is a great interview. I do want to get to IOTEX and the token as well as the burn economics or the token economics there behind the burn mechanics. So let's touch on that. We got about, I would say, 7 to 8 minutes left in the interview. So let's hit that.
Definitely. Yeah. So IoTeX is an ecosystem, right? At the core of what we are a smart contract platform. We built it completely from scratch to fit the unique needs of blockchain and IoT, right? So for us, success, you know, for other networks, success looks like how many users do you have, right? But in the IoTeX network, users are both humans and machines, right? So an important KPI or like a measure of success for us is how many devices we have on the network, right? And a lot of people ask us, you know, how do you tie the success of a Ucam or a Pebble to return value to shareholders? And we came up with this program called Burn Drop, where we allocated kind of 10% of the total supply. And every time a new device is registered to the chain, we're going to burn and drop some IoTeX to the community, right? And basically that ties the success of what we're doing on the business side of IoTeX as the foundation and rewards those that also adopt the products that we're pushing out, right? So it's a nice feedback loop where communities incentivize because they know that every device that they refer or purchase is going to be impacting the price of their holdings, as well as, you know, just hopefully enjoying the products that they actually use, right? So in the future, we also have this model where device manufacturers like Tenvis that we work with, after that 10% total supply is burned and dropped, we're going to put the onus on device manufacturers to burn their own tokens in order to register new devices to the network, right? So right now it's the IoTeX Foundation kind of incentivizing this burn drop. In the future, we want to maintain the same model, but by then we're going to have a really nice software suite to power a lot of these devices, and it's going to be something that will drive perpetual value to the IoTeX token, make it deflationary over time. So I think it's a pretty innovative token model, but just like there's so many parts of IoTeX that we're not going to be able to cover on this call, but I think the main point is we're trying to take all these very complex concepts that we talked about, right? Like centralized versus decentralized architectures, how blockchain, secure hardware, confidential computing kind of stack up, but present them in very clean ways. Like, here's a camera. If you want to learn every single thing about the camera, you can read our 10-page white paper, but you can also just be a user of it, right? So that's really the goal of IoTeX. We have a lot of people really focusing on different parts, whether you're interested in tokenomics, whether you're interested in, we just launched a DEX to, in the future, trade digital assets, starting with cryptocurrencies, maybe data next. So it's a really growing ecosystem, but what we're really proud of is we've set the foundation, and everything that's built on IoTeX now can leverage this foundation of security and privacy. And once the really big milestone hopefully we'll reach is that thing I mentioned, right? Once devices can talk to each other, or once a human can transact directly with the device, that's going to be, I think.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, I definitely like, just from face value, it would be really cool to earn IOTeX for actually using the device as well. I know you've got a ton of things planned on the roadmap, which we'll get into here in a second. You have the Halo grants as well. Have you had any successful grants kind of be proposed? How is the actual proposal process put forward? Is there some type of DAO, or does this come from the team?
So these are all done through GitHub, right? So with Halo, if any developers out there that are interested in this intersection of blockchain and IoT, definitely check out Halo. We've allocated 8% of the total supply to fund community projects, and we're starting to see some really cool ones come out. Everything from like staking and rewards dashboards for delegates to, there's a couple delegates on our network. One's named Consensus Networks. They're working on some medical supply chain stuff, and they're going to be utilizing Pebble for that purpose. So Pebble is fitting into their Halo grant. We also have a team called Health Blocks. They're trying to build some privacy preserving wearables, similar concept as Ucam, but for your health data, right? It's not medical data, it's wellness data. But even having control of your heart rate and like all this data, they have a goal of kind of allowing you to pick your own algorithm to assess your health data. Unlike videos from a Ucam where you can analyze it yourself using your eyes, health data is something that everyone wants to own, but no one can make sense of themselves. So that pick your own algorithm thing is really, really interesting. These are still just getting off the ground, but you kind of see the trend of where this is going, right? Like IoT is a horizontal industry. It's not a vertical, right? Every industry in the world touches IoT. And I think in the future, every D app in the world will touch IoT in some way to bring data in, to advance a workflow, to settle a payment, to provide history or context about the transaction. So I think, IoT hasn't had its big moment in crypto like DeFi has, but you can guarantee that this is the future, I think.
Absolutely, man. Larry, you laid down a great interview here. Is there anything we missed on IoTeX for 2021 or in the past that we might have not touched on here?
I think 2021 will be exciting. We have actually a big roadmap that we're going to be publishing. 2020 was an interesting year. We had 3 big goals that we set out at the beginning of the year, but we didn't really have a sequenced roadmap. And I think that's something that our community missed a little. So we're going to put out a sequenced roadmap as far as, this is our actual plan, right? This year was like, let's try a bunch of different stuff, always under the same principles and guiding principles of like what we're doing and why we're doing it. But our 3 goals this year were launch our mainnet GA, which we did very successfully. The other one was to institute multi-layered tokenomics, which we did with Burn Drop. And finally, the last one was to bring Ucam to market, which honestly was the hardest one. But we accomplished those goals very well. But very soon we're going to have a very crisp roadmap that will touch upon how devices like secure element devices on the edge will interact with secure element type of servers, will interact with the blockchain. And that's going to be another tech stack that's going to enable some really, really dynamic stuff. So, we have our eyes on the prize. I think, no offense to the other people working in IoT, but I think the industry is wide open, right? So we've always been a humble project. We don't like to, share too many things that aren't completed. But now we're getting to the point where we're just going to be launching stuff left and right. So, just pay attention to what we got going on and check us out.
Yeah, I can honestly say that I'm super excited to see what you guys are putting out in 2021, man. And definitely 2020 was an interesting time. All of us would agree. All right, last question. Book recommendation for everyone that's listening out there. Do you have a book recommendation? Could be crypto, non-crypto, anything that comes to your mind.
I do like autobiographies, and I just read Barack Obama's autobiography. It was pretty good. I'm not actually a huge reader. I like to listen and watch people speak, right? And I'll just share one, like a YouTube type of interview I listen. Schwarzman, the CEO of Blackstone, I think one thing I listen to him is kind of just his evolution as a person. And I just like his demeanor. Like, this is how he talks. He never talks louder than this. And it almost makes you like listen closer to him. So like, just like I've been thinking about like how I want to present myself, and like, sometimes I'm very animated and need to make a point by showing people I'm making a point. But, just kind of, I think this is something that, people should think about, is like how people look at you and the way you present yourself. So that's just one thing that was kind of top of mind, kind of random, but yeah, check out Schwarzman from Blackstone.
I will definitely look at that, man. I can't wait to check that out. Larry, this has been a great interview here. Larry Peng, Head of Business Development from IoTeX. Absolutely phenomenal interview. Hopefully we can have you back to talk about all those things in 2021, man. But great interview. Thank you so much.
Definitely. Thanks for having me. We'll check back in 2021.
Hey guys, we hope you enjoyed today's episode. Make sure to check out Layer 1 on all the audio and video platforms listed in the description. Thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you next week.